Hey all, this is the Everything's Coming Up marketing podcast, and today I'm here with Travis Tyler, who deals with stress by
taking medication, going to therapy, and talking to loved ones.
I love that. All three in that order?
Medicine comes first, then therapy, then talking with family and friends, yeah.
I love that. So I want to start off by asking you how you're doing.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, how am I doing? Today I am doing equal parts jazzed and stressed, overwhelmed, and trying to work my way to a nap at some point today would be really cool. Like after work, like a little 30-minute meditation turns into a nap kind of moment. That's how I'm doing today.
Can you tell me a little bit about your nap strategy in life? How do you approach naps?
I learned my nap strategy from Stephen Dubner, who is the host of the Freakonomics podcast. And he is very pro nap, and as am I. And since I have the luxury of working from home, I am conscious of my ability to nap is way more accessible than it is for the vast majority of people. And I take advantage of it. My philosophy on nap is basically you could split your day into 2 separate days. Stealing an idea from Kramer. And you can nap in the middle of your day after you've worked or done whatever. And that's like your first day or your first part of your day. The nap then helps you to go into your second part of your day.
Wow. So your life is split up into like pre-sleep, post-sleep, pretty much.
Yes.
I love that. Sleeping is one of my favorite hobbies. The one I'm best at as well.
I have a lot of sleep anxiety, so that's why it's so important to me.
Okay, tell me what that means.
So I've been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder as well as obsessive compulsive disorder. And when I'm really anxious, that's when the OCD starts to like come out in different ways. And I have different forms of OCD, and we can get into that later. But a lot of times people think that obsessive compulsive disorder just means like they're neat freaks or they have to line things up in a certain way. That is not the definition through the DSM-5. It is intrusive thoughts that then force compulsive behaviors to try to deal with those intrusive thoughts. And if someone's like, well, what does that mean? Intrusive thoughts are thoughts that you don't like having that scare you, and they give you anxiety. And somebody might say, well, everybody has that. That's true. Everybody has intrusive thoughts, but not everybody has intrusive thoughts that won't go away and then cause them to behave in a way that tries to alleviate the pain of those thoughts. And a lot of my sleep anxiety stems from, as an early child, having sleep be something that was very important to my family. And I lived in a household where it was like you have to tiptoe around mom's sleep schedule. And that caused a lot of sleep anxiety. Like if I woke mom up, if I disrupted her sleep, I was, in trouble. I was doing something very wrong. And so sleep became just very important to me through the culture that I lived in. And my mom was, the sole breadwinner for my family. So sleep was really important to her, and it's nothing against her, but definitely like caused some extra anxiety. And ever since a very early age, if I can't fall asleep, I get so frustrated to the point where, when I was a kid, I would cry. As an adult, I just get really antsy and hot and uncomfortable. And I feel bad that I'm waking my wife up. And then the whole day is ruined the next day because I didn't get good sleep. So that's a little bit about my sleep anxiety. I don't know if we wanted to go super deep into it. Yeah.
I want to go as deep as possible. And I don't know if this is insensitive. I don't think it is. But this, like, these things that we kind of think are normal because they're the way that we grew up. And then, we like unpack that when we're older. I recently saw an Everybody Hates Chris episode that was very similar to this, where no one was supposed to wake up the dad because he worked 3 jobs. And then if you did, like, you get in trouble, you'd feel really guilty. And to me, I was like, haha, that's funny. And now you're telling me that was your real experience.
Yeah. And it's carried into adulthood. I remember in college, I was living with a roommate in a tiny, room. And I took copious amounts of melatonin to try to help me sleep every night. I would have a routine that I developed, and I was really anxious because I kept being woken up in the middle of the night by my roommates snoring. I hadn't had a roommate since I was a little kid, and I had to share a room with my brother, so this was like all new to me, and I was always like falling asleep in classes, and I was really irritable, and I was just having such a hard time sleeping with somebody in the same room as me. And that's where it kind of like really all blossomed. I started sleeping with a sleep mask, with earplugs, with ear wax that you put over the ear. I mean, it was just like a whole thing, routine. I had to have a very specific like temperature set in the room. I had to eat something very specific before I went to bed. And I just thought it was sleep hygiene. And then I worked with an actual OCD specialist for something different. And then this came up in conversation, and she was like, wait, hold on. My friend, that's not normal. And I was like, well, I prioritize sleep. She's like, no, honey, you are taking this to a whole another level. You have sleep OCD. And I was like, what? Nuh-uh. And so we did some exercises over like a 12-week period where I did basically, if anyone is familiar with OCD, they might have heard of exposure response prevention therapy. And it is a form of therapy where you are slowly exposing yourself to the things that cause a lot of compulsions, that cause a lot of anxiety. And the idea is to basically chip away at the anxiety, because you're showing both your body and your mind in step-by-step repetitive fragments that this thing that scares the shit out of you is not going to kill you in the way that you think it will, or ruin your life, or whatever it is that you're afraid of, right? So we did exercises like sleeping without earplugs for one night, sleeping without an eye mask for one night. And these are like, I was like, okay, not a big deal, whatever. But then I would sit there listening to my dog and my wife snore and make noise, and I'm like, I can't fucking sleep. And it was eventually working the way up to where I went a whole night without sleeping. And it was just like, you have to stay up the entire night and then go to work the next day. And that was like always my fear, that I was going to be underproductive. The day would be ruined. I would be bad at my job. Something terrible would happen if I just didn't get great sleep. And it worked wonders. I became a much better, easier sleeper. If I don't get sleep, it's just the way it goes. So that's my whole story.
No, I love it because it does lend itself to getting into the marketing aspect. You're a marketer. A lot of your job is spent thinking, breathing, doing marketing. And you're someone with anxiety, with OCD. And I don't know how easily you can tell me they connect, but as someone also with anxiety who is a marketer, I understand that how they connect for me. How do they connect for you?
I would say it connects for me because of what money represents to me. And I've had to do a lot of thinking about this. But basically, whenever my bank account gets really low, whenever my credit card debt gets really high, whenever my job is threatened in any way, I see it as an attack on my security, my stability. And I look at money as a way to be safe. If I don't have money, I am unsafe, is like the connection my brain has made over the years. And anytime something jeopardizes my job, I get scared. I get worried and I panic. Whether that's like things aren't good at my company, layoffs, budget cuts, I underperform, the company underperforms, somebody doesn't like my contributions, I'm seen as unnecessary. I don't get along with. I mean, just the list goes on and on, Amber, of just like all the things that contribute to my fear of losing a job, of not being employed, of not having money, and having to like beg friends and family to help keep myself afloat is very scary to me.
I can relate to this 100%. I have a lot of the same anxieties. I am the main breadwinner in my household, and I
Mm-hmm.
believe you are as well. I don't know if that's giving away too much
No,
information,
you're
but
good. Yeah.
yeah. And yeah, that it haunts me. Just I know how much money we need, and I know how much money I bring in, and then I know how much we'd be losing if I lost my job. So I'm curious, how do you manage that? How do you manage these fears, especially now?
The first step was just recognizing what it was. I read a really great book that I recommend for all couples called 8 Dates. And it was given to me by my sister, who is a therapist. And it is written by the godparents of relationship therapy, the Gottmans. And the Gottman method is unbelievable, but it was through conversations that this book has you do as homework with your partner about what money represents, where you got your ideas and beliefs of money. And through that, I gained awareness of what it meant to me. And that's why I was able to understand, like, oh, that's why I panic about debt and low balances way more than you. And so I have a partner who is much more relaxed about it. Understand that money comes and money goes is kind of like the philosophy that my wife lives by. Sometimes you have a lot of it and sometimes you don't. And that has helped me. And just having a partner who I've communicated this with, they understand where I'm coming from, and they help balance me out. So I've tried to adopt a bit more of her philosophy to be a bit more healthy about it. But it's just managing it. It's never going to go away. My belief's never going to transform. I mean, Biggie Smalls said it best: "Mo money, mo problems."
Yeah, I agree and I don't agree. More money, more problems. I guess it's like more money, and then you realize how much shit you were under when you didn't have money. For me, that's kind of what it is. When I look at my bank account now, I'm like, oh my God, I used to work months to make the same amount that I make now in a single paycheck. And it's absolutely bananas to think about. And I have this mentality that it could go away at absolutely any second. And then there are things that I continue to do that I did in my early 20s where I'm like, oh, I got to keep these Ziploc bags and just rinse them out because I don't want to spend money on more Ziploc bags. And there's just like strategies that I have not let go of because like they're just so important to me and so ingrained in me. Sounds like you understand.
I do understand. I have never been to the point of washing Ziploc bags, but it's because I have a different problem, which is I am always living just outside my means. I don't know why, but I'm always stretching my dollars to the absolute maximum. I'm not good at saving, and that presents a lot of problems as well. So when I say mo money, mo problems, I have a habit of being a baller on with no budget, basically. And it's not like I don't drive a Tesla, I drive a used Toyota Corolla, right? But I like to travel. I spend a lot of my money on vacations every year. I don't really have any savings. So there's a lot of things that contribute to that anxiety and behaviors that I'm hoping I can get a little bit better with. Thinking with maturity, it will. And so that's where I'm at today.
Yeah, there's, I think, a couple mentalities, and I understand if you didn't have money and then you have money. The feeling is, I want to enjoy having money. I've never had these experiences. I've never been able to do this before, but then that contributes to the original stress.
Yeah,
It's
it's like
tough.
that the character Fat Bastard from Austin Powers. He has this scene where he goes, "I eat because I'm unhappy, and I'm unhappy because I eat. It's a vicious cycle." And I believe that to be so true with how I spend my money.
Yeah. That was a great accent, by the way.
Thank you. I
Absolutely
watched that
killer.
movie way too many times as a kid. Probably shouldn't have
I've
been watching it.
I've only seen it once. Was that character played by Mike Myers?
Hmm. Like many
Okay.
of the characters in that movie were.
I was gonna say, I recently came up with a perfect formula for figuring out. I think that Americans often don't know if someone is using an Irish accent or a Scottish accent. And I was like, it's a Scottish accent if they sound like Shrek. Like that is now, right?
Correct.
So I just needed to share that because it's like science at this point in my head. It's factual. So I want to talk a little bit about your job. So can you get in a little bit into the specifics of your job and the stressors that affect your mental health? Sometimes day to day, but maybe just like on a larger scale.
Yes. So my job is pretty unique. I have developed this title and role from scratch. I work currently at PandaDoc, and I am a senior digital content producer. I stole that title from a job listing that I saw at both Spotify and Amazon when we were trying to better define what it is that I work on within the marketing department at PandaDoc. The marketing department at PandaDoc is huge. So just for context, we have close to 925 employees at PandaDoc. And I want to say we have somewhere between, I don't even know, 80 people on the marketing team to like 65
Wow.
to 85, somewhere in that range. I don't know, because sometimes we've gone through some changes. I've been with the company for 3.5 years, and I've seen it grow tremendously. And we have basically teams that where one person, their whole job is like what one part of my marketing generalist job used to be at my last company. And I'm able to really hone in on a very specific skill set. And so for me, that's content creation through multimedia platforms. So videos, GIFs. I do vertical style comedy. I also have a bi-weekly and monthly podcast called the Customer Engagement Lab through PandaDoc. And I've been doing that for about 2 years. And where my anxiety in this role comes from is a lack of budget. What I do requires money, especially at the level that we do it at. So I've created over 72 podcast episodes here at PandaDoc. And in the last 1.5 years, we started recording them out of a professional studio where we rent by the hour. And it's actually a PandaDoc customer is how I found them. And it's just about 30 minutes from my house. And once a month, we go in there and record about anywhere from like 3 to 6 hours of content. And it takes money to do that. And before then, I was just recording it at my house with the equipment I ordered on Amazon. And I slowly over time was just sticking with it. At the end of year 1, I got $1,000 budget to buy equipment. Before then, I had no budget to buy any equipment. Year 2, I said, let's start renting a studio. We started renting a studio. And so right now we're experiencing in the tech world a lot of budget concerns, not being able to hit revenue goals. So the whole go-to-market team, marketing, sales, customer success, everybody's under scrutiny, and not just at my company, but I know this is happening at every company right now in the tech space. And so without an investment in video content, I get scared when I'm asked to, cut down the number of podcast episodes that I'm creating, or how can we save money this month, counting our pennies and whatnot. And so I'm like, oh boy, that gets me a little worried.
Yeah. Yeah, because your podcast, I've checked it out. It's a visual podcast,
Yes.
which is a funny thing that we've created for ourselves. It's a visual podcast, and it's amazing. And you have guests on, like big name guests sometimes, and they're not always located where you're located.
Correct.
So there's like expenses plus other expenses probably that I can't even imagine. And And I can totally relate to that, understanding that now we're being asked to do more with less. And it's like, what does that mean? What do you mean? If I'm meant to do more with less, what are the expectations now that I present the same level of results? Or like, do you have these questions?
Mm-hmm. I do get these questions. Do more. Can we do more with less? And I try to get thoughtful and smart about it. And I try to look at it as well as like, if we had to, we're constantly in my households trying to figure out ways to where we can cut things if needed, right? We go through quarters, months, years where we buy things that maybe we don't need. Money is, like I said, money comes and goes. So like there are periods of time where it's like, let's cut all the subscriptions that we don't need, that we signed up for and have accumulated. And so that's definitely like step one, and just recognizing like it happens to me in my house, so I can understand why it would happen at a business, and trying to be empathetic as much as I can. So yeah.
I like kind of where that landed, being empathetic with yourself a little bit, like learning how to give yourself grace. Do you have any strategies for recognizing when you're pushed to a place where you're being hard on yourself, or you're feeling extra anxiety because of these external forces? Do you have any strategies for like dealing with that?
Yes, I have gotten better at recognizing it. It has taken time. So if somebody that's listening to this is like, I'm the hardest person on myself, I'm harder than anyone else is on myself, I relate to you. And it has taken a couple of years of therapy and some pretty miraculous moments. I remember a couple years ago when I had first started at PandaDoc, I was in therapy and I was comparing myself to my siblings. My oldest brother, I'm the youngest of three. I have an oldest brother who's a lawyer. And I said earlier, my middle sister, she's a therapist. And they have just such an ingrained identity with their career, and they seem so successful. And I was comparing myself to them, and my therapist was, just like, what's going through your head? And I'm like, well, I'm not as good as them. I'm not as, what am I? Like, he knows exactly who he is. She knows exactly who he is. I don't know what I am. I'm just like the lost child over here. Like, and he was like, where's this coming from? Is it coming from your mom? And I was like, no, she supports me. Is it coming from your dad? No, he supports me. Coming from your siblings? They talk shit about you? And I was like, no. And then I was like, I broke down, and he's like, it's coming from you. And I was like, yeah, it's coming from me. And he's like, we got to work on that. So that was a big moment for me. And so I'm hoping that anyone that listens to this can recognize that part of realizing your stress is talking about it with somebody, hopefully a professional, and catching yourself. That's the best thing we can do. That's a lot of what meditation is, right? We try to focus on our breath, and we catch ourselves getting lost in thought. And that's okay. That happens. That's the human brain. Let's just gently bring it back to the breath, right? Like, let's bring it back. So when you catch yourself being hard on yourself, stressing, like for me, I start to feel like the best way I can describe it is tired. I feel tired. That's what I say. That's what I externalize. I'm tired. What do you mean you're tired? Tired of sitting in this chair. Okay. I want to get up and walk around. I'm tired of thinking about this topic. Okay. Why? Because I'm not coming up with anything good. Is it okay that you're not coming up with anything good? Yeah. Okay. Why don't you go for a walk? Come back and see what you're a smart guy. And so it's like having these conversations with yourself in your head, sometimes out loud. And that's definitely what helps me, is catching myself, remembering like, hey, you're the one putting stress on yourself. And you can control that. So let's dial it back a bit. Let's be nice to yourself. The creative process is complicated. And as marketers, oftentimes we are tasked with being creative. You can't always force creativity. So take care of the things you need to take care of, and gently bring yourself back.
That's so important. I'm like slowly getting closer to the microphone because I'm so like enthralled by what you're saying. And I think that it started with the questions that your therapist was asking you when I started thinking, how do I interrogate myself in those moments where I feel like I'm not doing enough? What is enough? That I'm under succeeding? Who's saying that? You know, like these things, these narratives that I create in my head, I should probably start asking these questions to myself. Like they don't have to come externally. I rely so much on, this is a therapy session for us. I rely so much on like annual reviews and external feedback to decide if I'm performing well enough or if I am up to snuff, which ain't the way to go if you're going to like live a long, happy, content life, you know? So that is great advice.
I like what you said there about asking where those questions are coming from, because I'm sure you've heard this, and I'm sure your listeners have heard this, but when we're so tough on ourselves, a good question to ask yourself is, would you talk like that to your best friend? Like, why would you treat yourself shittier than your best friend? Like, what? Don't do that. So that's what I try to do when I'm like, hey, little Trav, doing all right? No. Why? Because this, and this. What would your best friend say to you? I'm sorry. That sucks. I'm sorry you're going through that. You need a hug? Yeah. Want to go do something fun for yourself? Yeah. Okay. Let's go do it. It's like, that's so dorky, but that's really what helps me to just let the emotion pass. And before the session's over, I do want to talk about substance misuse as well, because that's been a big theme for me. So whenever you want to dive into that, I'm happy to share my story as well.
Yeah. Okay. A follow-up on that, like friend thing, I use that with my friends. If I hear them talking bad about themselves, I'm like, hey, don't talk about my best friend like that. And it really does work. So yeah. Just like that. Throwing it back on them, or my partner has been going through a hard time. And I'm just like, don't talk about my partner like that. It's not nice. And it does, like, it redirects. They're like, oh, right. You know,
yeah. When you frame it in that third person, language is so important with how we understand and internalize thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And so I like that little trick. Hey, don't talk about my, the love of my life that way. And then they're like, what do you mean? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, stop bullying the love of my life. I love that.
Yeah.
Let's dig into substance abuse, something that I am only familiar with tangentially. So you're the subject matter expert on this, I guess.
Only in my own journey, not in anyone else's journey. And what I'm about to say, and everything I say, disclaimer, like, I'm speaking on behalf of my experience. I'm not guaranteeing anything that I say here will work for you. And so I hope your listeners understand that. I have a feeling they will, because they're probably very empathic individuals if they're listening to a show like this. So that is that. Where does my journey begin with substance misuse? So my old way of dealing with a lot of the stuff we have been talking about leading up to this was drinking. I have built a culture in my life around drinking. I was proud to be known as a drinker. I saw drinking in my household growing up. I had one parent who drank a lot, and I had one who was in AA. And I always found that to be like a weird, like, dichotomy. And in the back of my head, I've always just been like, oh, be careful. You might, some people say it's hereditary. Some people say it's not. And I have now officially been sober for 2 months. I decided to, thank you.
Congratulations.
Stop drinking December 14th last year. And it was really hard at first, but I've been sober curious for probably like 3 years, really since the pandemic started. So for anyone else that's out there and is on their journey and thinking about how they want to explore a sober curious lifestyle, I strongly recommend you check out a podcast called Sober Awkward, and just start with some of their early episodes. And that's really kind of what got me started down this much healthier and happier path in my life. And I won't, tell my whole entire story here, but essentially, I was not a guy that was just like, abusive or like in a gutter. We have these ideas of people who misuse alcohol, and I think our generation's better about it than like the older generation of just like being like, oh yeah, you don't drink, that's cool. And certain cultures are, view it differently, and every family is a little bit different. But I take Zoloft for my OCD and my anxiety. That is an SSRI. And when you're on SSRIs, doctors typically recommend you do not drink because it will limit the effects of the medication, and the two will interact with each other in ways that don't make you feel so good. And when I first got on them in 2020, I got on antidepressants at like the peak of COVID. I was just completely overwhelmed and having panic attacks. And full blown, just like OCD. It was a bad place to be. So I got on medications, and the first month was fucking awful. I was so medicine resistant, and that could be a whole episode in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I eventually just had my therapist make a good point where he was like, I see you wear glasses. I was like, yeah. He's like, you can still see without your glasses, right? I was like, yeah. He's like, so you wear glasses to make you see better. And I was like, I think I know where you're going with this. I understand the metaphor. He's like, do you? Because you come in here every 6 months with a new pair of glasses like they're a fashion statement. You don't think twice about them. And yet something that's going to help you sleep better, that's going to help your relationship, it's going to help you just be in a better version of yourself, you're so resistant to that. And I'm curious where the stigma's coming from. And I was like, damn, you got me there. So I gave it a shot, and I was like, I got nothing. Because he was like, you've been doing the no medication thing for how many years now? And I was like, a long time. And he's like, look, I'm not saying that medication's going to solve every problem. I'm not going to say that that you can't fix a lot of the things that are going on with you with like the perfect diet, the perfect exercise regimen, tons of meditation, tons of journaling, tons of therapy. You can, and you will. This just makes everything go smoother and easier and faster. It's like living life. You could play a video game, and you could play it on like the super hard veteran mode, or you can just play it on like medium mode and still have fun and enjoy it. But it's just a little bit easier. And I was like, oh, I really like that metaphor. I'm a big video game guy, so I dig that. And so I stopped drinking for 6 months, went sober, got on the medications, and I felt better than I ever fucking felt my whole life. And I was like, this is amazing. I sleep better. I'm fighting with my spouse. Like, not at all. I am more thoughtful. I have more patience. I'm just chilling a lot more than I was. And so it was great. I had a great experience. And I know everybody has different experiences. I have friends who said that it made them suicidal. I have friends who've told me it made them feel terrible. And I will tell you, getting on and off of SSRIs is not easy.
No, it's a nightmare.
I was, on the verge of vomiting every day. I was ringing in my ears. I was like, geez, I had like so many, terrible side effects, and they all, for pretty much the most part, all went away after about 2 weeks. And then after about a month, I was like, wow, I feel fucking great. And it wasn't like overnight. It was slow. And like it's like when you lose weight or you gain weight, you like don't really notice, but then all of a sudden one day you look and you're like, oh fuck, like I look different. Yeah. It was the same kind of experience. So I say all of that to explain I'm not even supposed to be drinking. I shouldn't be drinking. And I was very heavily, and I was using it to blunt all of the emotions I didn't want to deal with that we have been talking about: the stress, the anxiety, the worry, the lack of sleep, the OCD. I was just a casual drinker, loved to just have it socially. And then I slowly realized, like, I'm drinking a fuck ton. My medication isn't working, and it's really poorly interacting with my medications. I'm becoming like suicidal. I'm becoming a danger to myself and others. I am having super high highs and super low lows. I'm crying when like it doesn't call for it. I was all over the place, and like just kept seeing a common thread in issues I was having was alcohol. And I tried for 2 years to do moderation. I downloaded an app called the Reframe App. Strongly recommend it, where I was learning every day and tracking my drinking weekly. And it shows you how much money you're saving. It shows you how many calories you're saving. It's really cool. I saw it on Instagram and was like, oh, I'm sober curious. Let me check this out. And I realized I fucking suck at moderation, Amber. Like, I just am one of those people that just, I try so hard to moderate, and I just, I slip. All of a sudden, I'm just like 2 bottles of wine deep alone. And you're like, oh boy, here we go.
Yeah. And then the effects of the just being like, oh, well, I can't do this right. Like, I'm sure that you were really hard on yourself after that happened. It's just a kind of spiral effect.
You're like, why can't I moderate? Like, I look at people who can take it or leave it, like drinking, and I'm like, how do you do that? How is that possible? I'm not one of those. I'm not built that way, I guess. And so I just, and I know we're at probably close to time here, but I wanted to just share that with everybody. And if anyone wants to talk about their sobriety journey, I'm always here. I'm always happy to chat about it. And I'm still early in mine, so I'm probably going through a lot of the things that you will go through or have gone through if you're just getting started.
Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation, especially considering in the B2B, especially tech SaaS world, there is kind of a mentality of work hard, party hard.
Oh, yeah.
Offsites are centered around alcohol. There's happy hours, there's cheers, all of these things that just kind of conditioned to think are normal. Yeah. And I drink, but I drink in moderation. Yeah. And what is interesting is, like, I brought it up before at work, like, does this have to be called this alcohol centric name? And they were like, oh, are you sober? And I was like, no, I'm just normal. It's just that not everything has to be about alcohol. And I think the mentality is it's so there. And I can't imagine how it affects, like, people maybe like yourself who can't really work in moderation like that. And then there's this pressure to fit in and drink at offsites or to go to happy hours. It's rough.
It is rough. And I will say that the first few times you go to, like, your first event where you're, like, not drinking, that's a whole thing. And again, I would recommend everyone check out Sober Awkward. They have an entire episode where they talk about strategies for going into your first event as a sober, curious person. And how do you explain to people, how do you turn down drinks? There's all sorts of scenarios that we anxious people like to overthink in our head. And luckily for me, over the years, I've gained I've overcome a lot of my social anxiety, and I've learned to dominate my reality, which sounds like what does that mean? When someone tries to push their reality too hard onto mine, it's never going to win. So if somebody really is trying to pressure me to do anything that I don't want to do, it's either going to end up in a fist fight or I'm just leaving. So, like, I try to just stay super true to my core confidence and belief in who I am and what I stand for. And that takes practice. That did not happen overnight. That was years and years and years and years of practicing social situations that made me really scared and really sweaty and anxious, and lose sleep over and just a mess, avoiding those situations for years. And it gets easier. It definitely gets easier, and you get more comfortable. And then you start to look back and think, like, boy, alcohol is such a, like, normalized thing in our society. Like you were saying, like, like alcohol is, like, you don't do coke in moderation. No. And so it's just fascinating. And I do see people who truly can moderate with alcohol. And I'm like, wow, that's fucking amazing. My wife is one of those people. And it makes getting sober a lot easier because like she's like, oh, I don't care. We don't need to have a drink. It's fine, honey. And I'm like, okay. And then I see people who I'm like, oh, you're fighting something, and I've been there, and I hope that you can figure that out soon because that's not sustainable. And that's what usually ends up happening is age catches up with you, and you're like, I can't fucking do this anymore.
Mm-hmm. The hangovers. No, thank you. Never again.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you.
It's so important what you were saying about, what was it, dominating your own reality? To me, sounds a little bit like being self-possessed and just having the ability, which is so hard to just say, stop, I don't like that.
Yeah.
But it's so hard. We're taught to do it as kids. Somehow we lose it into adulthood.
Yeah.
You're on this incredible journey.
In middle school, I think, is when it really happens because we just want to fit in. We don't want to get picked on. We don't want to be ostracized. We want to be, one of the normal kids that, and I think that's where we lose a lot of things as middle school and high school. And I want to reassure anyone listening to this that if you're struggling with your drinking, I still am. I still get cravings. Like, I don't have it all figured out. I might sound really confident. I might be dominating my reality onto others who are trying to push theirs onto mine. I still get fucking nervous. I still lose sleep. I still have OCD. I still have anxiety. And I still have, alcohol dependency stuff. It doesn't ever go away, which is a hard fucking pill to swallow. And I remember hearing my therapist say, like, you will be dealing with this shit for the rest of your life. And I was like, why would you say that to me? And I was like,
shout out to your therapist who's like a real one.
We had a great, I don't see him anymore. I was with him for like 6 years. So we had a really strong relationship. So it was the time and place to make those types of interventions was, really powerful and meaningful. If your therapist isn't saying shit like that to you, that doesn't mean they're not a good therapist. So, but yeah, like it just gets a little bit easier to deal with it. And then you also get much better at recognizing when you're falling into like bad patterns that you've been in before that don't lead to the outcomes that you want. That's all that it is. That's the majority of what a mental health journey is. It's just, you're never done. The work is never done. And it's what makes life interesting as well. If it was done, it would be boring as fuck. So, and I would just be like, all right, I'm good. See you later.
Yeah. And what would that be like?
I don't know.
Can't even imagine it.
Yeah, some weird fourth plane utopia that isn't my reality.
Yeah. And I think no one would be funny, like need a little bit of that.
Yeah, there'd be no funny because there'd be no not funny. I don't know. This is getting really deep.
There'd be no Seinfeld. Yeah, let's not do this. Actually, I think we should wrap up. I'm actually curious if you could tell me your favorite joke.
I heard Seinfeld. We're talking about Seinfeld. He had a joke, which was, isn't it weird how we whisper certain things? Like when we're trying to figure out what the tip should be at a restaurant, what's the tip? Why do we whisper that? Why do we whisper that? And then there was another one too. He's like, we're on the, he's like, I just find it so weird. Golf. We've got these beautiful manicured lawns. The sun is shining. We have blue skies. It's amazing. But don't get too loud. Shh, gotta whisper. Gotta make sure we gotta keep it quiet. Quiet. It's the only sport that does that. It's just a very peculiar thing. He delivered a lot better than me, but that's his joke basically. Is like, why do we whisper about the weirdest things?
That is that classic Seinfeld observational humor. And we'll end on a golf clap.
He did have a bit about the golf clap.
I'm sure he did.
Yeah.
You have been a wonderful guest. Thank you for being so open and vulnerable with us. I am going to put your information in the show notes. And if you want to provide the links to the, you had some sober some sober resources and some like book resources. I will include those as well. And I hope that everyone enjoyed this episode and that you go follow Travis and DM him if you feel like you could use a little bit of encouragement.
Amber, thank you for starting this podcast, and thank you for giving a voice to a lot of the mental health issues and challenges that we all face. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming.